On the west coast of Scotland lies a remote district where secret byways crisscross the landscape. Bounded by lochs and defended by high mountains, this is the land of Moidart. The hills, lochs and tangled woods here make this the perfect place to lose yourself or possibly to cover your tracks. In the past, this was the ideal location for a whole range of clandestine activities, including rebellion. The Scottish landscape is studded with lochs, over 30,000 of them at the last count. And to appreciate them better, I'm on a loch-hopping journey across Scotland, exploring our long fjord-like sea lochs, travelling around our many freshwater lochs, and discovering the secrets of the countless lochans on the open moors. In this programme, I'm visiting the out-of-the-way lochs of the west coast. I'll discover the legacy of the Jacobites, ring a bell for the departed, and learn how war and its aftermath have moulded isolated lochside communities. On this grand tour, I'm taking a road less travelled through the wild lands of Moidart. My route starts in the Sound of Arasaig, makes landfall at Glenouig, follows a Jacobite trail to Lochs and up to Glenfinnan, then crosses over the hills to Loch Eilert and the abandoned communities of Ardnish. This is the Sound of Arasaig, a stunning stretch of the sea lying between the mainland and the small isles. It's a place writ large in the history of Scotland. In 1745, a French ship anchored off the west coast of Scotland. On board was a young man, Prince Charles Edward Stuart, the Prince Regent of the exiled British monarchy. Now, he defied all expectations by sailing from France with just a handful of companions to start a rising, a rebellion to win back the British crowns for the exiled Stuart dynasty. Charles, or Bonnie Prince Charlie as he became known, set about drumming up support for his campaign. Clan Donald, who dominated this area, were ardent followers, and amongst them was the Gaelic bard Alistair MacVaischa Alistair. He became an officer in the Prince's army and kept a fascinating journal of his time in service. When Alistair first met the Prince, he was very impressed by the young man's charisma. At his first appearance, he wrote, I felt my heart swell to my very throat. And like many others over the coming weeks and months, the Prince had completely won him over, simply, it seems, by being a prince. Tradition claims that after Charles landed on the coast, he headed south and made his way west through Moidart. Nowadays, a road cuts through these secluded lands from Glenouig, but when the Prince arrived, he would have found only a rough track used by funeral parties. This is the old Coffin Road, effectively a road of the dead, so perhaps not the luckiest association for the Prince's route to adventure and conquest. For centuries, the dead were carried along the track from this part of Moidart to their final resting place, a holy island in Lochs, the Green Isle. Angus, come on. I've joined up with Angus Peter McLean to learn more about this ancient tradition. So this is the old Coffin Road?
Indeed it was, yes. They used to carry the coffins from Smirrissery and Glenouig on this track en route to the Green Isle.
Can you remember a time when this was being used for that purpose?
I can remember one lot of remains going through here. I was a very small child.
Would there have been many people following behind the coffin? Would there have been a large cortege?
I would think 30 to 40 people. And they would take it in relays, 4 at a time. And they built little cairns. Each of these cairns belonged to a particular family. and everybody that was at the funeral, they put one stone on top of the cairn.
Really?
Yes.
As we climb up to the Bealach, the top of the pass, we come across one of those stone cairns.
This is where they rested with the coffins, just on top here.
We're actually standing at the summit of the old coffin
We
road
are,
here.
yes, yes. This is the only cairn of 42 that were here before the road came through.
Whose is this cairn?
This is the MacDonalds, the famous pipers of Glenewig.
So I imagine that once the coffin was rested here, weary backs would have stretched.
Yes, that's right.
And they would have thought about the deceased and had a wee libation.
Rested for a couple of hours, maybe.
And I think it's only fitting, perhaps, that we
Absolutely. To
we
them.
keep up the tradition.
Yes, yes.
To the MacDonalds of Glenewig.
Indeed.
Sláinte.
Sláinte.
From the Bealach, the funeral procession would have continued downhill, where the track joins the shores of Loch Moidart. This rugged sea loch cuts inland for 8 kilometres and is dotted with picturesque islands. On one of them sits Castle Chirham, an iconic location in the heart of Clan Donald country. Castle Chirham has been a ruin ever since its owner, the MacDonald chief of Clan Ranald, set fire to it in a previous Jacobite rebellion. 30 years later, the chief's descendants took up the mantle again and joined Bonnie Prince Charlie in the quest to restore his father to the British throne. As I head back to the old coffin road, I'm surprised to hear the noise of a revving petrol engine and rush to catch up with trials bike aficionado John Moffat astride his throbbing machine.
Now, John, I've been told that this track is an old coffin road, but you know it in a completely different light.
Yeah, I know it as the Devil's Staircase, a section in the Scottish Six Days Trial, a motorcycle event for off-road competition that's been going since 1909. And
Yeah.
it was what they called a star hill, which was one of the sections that separated the men from the boys.
Why was it called the Devil's Staircase?
Purely because there's big steep drops at the side and it takes you from ground level up quite a height.
Now, I've seen some old footage of the climb back in the day, I think it was the 1940s, and I was amazed, first of all, by how primitive the bikes look, and also by the attire that the riders are wearing. They've got flat caps and these big, long, look like trench coats.
Yeah, they were called Davin coats. It was to try and take the eye of the observer off the fact that the rider had put a dab down on the ground, touched the ground.
Have you ever ridden this yourself?
Yeah, I rode it once in 1977.
And there would have been an audience there as well?
Yeah, there was quite a lot of people watching. A lot of the riders obviously stand and watch your performance as well, so there's always a bit of a gallery.
It's a lot of pressure.
A wee bit of pressure, yeah.
And you're going to have an attempt today.
We'll give it a go.
Yeah. Well, good luck.
Thanks very much.
I'll watch.
It's been over 40 years since John made it to the top, so I'm feeling a wee bit apprehensive as he coaxes his bike around the tight corners and over the slippery rocks of the Devil's Staircase.
Woohoo! Excellent, John. You did it.
Thank you.
I think there might have been a couple of dabs there, but we'll just gloss over that.
I hope so.
Yeah. Congratulations, and I've really enjoyed watching you.
Thanks very much, Bob.
Thankfully, it's easy going for me now as I continue down the track to the shores of the mighty Loch Shiel. Overlooking the loch is a place called Dallalay, said to be the birthplace of the soldier poet Alistair MacVeische Alistair, who apparently planted the oak tree here some 270 years ago.
It was also at Dallalay that Bonnie Prince Charlie came with a guard of 50 MacDonald men. From here they boarded boats for the long row up the loch.
This was also the end of the coffin road crossing Moidart. From Dallalay, they were taken by boat to their final resting place. Following in the wake of the dead, I'm hitching a lift with archaeologist George Geddes across Loch Shiel.
George, where are we heading?
We're heading to Elan Finnan. It's a holy island associated with a chap called Finnan, supposedly an Irish saint, just around the time of Columba, or very slightly later. So
No.
the 7th or 8th century.
So as a holy island, it's a place of burial as well then?
It's a place of burial for more than 1,000 years, and still occasionally people are buried there.
As we land on St Finnan's Isle, or the Green Isle as it's also known, I'm immediately struck by the strangely calm atmosphere of the island. Despite the rain and the mist, it's a beautiful place, and you can understand why it's been an important site for such a long time.
So this mound we're walking up, this is the earliest part of the graveyard.
So what would you say is the oldest grave slab that you've discovered so far?
Well, there's 3 or 4 really stylistically early ones on the island, and one of the earliest is just this cross slab here, this small one.
The wee one?
Yeah, this is probably 12 or 1300 years old. There's a set of really nice early medieval ones like this, and then there's 3 or 4 really nice late medieval stones, which are the ones that are associated with the clan and the Gallic
so-
power and the Berlins. And
So you're talking about what, 1500s?
1500 or so,
Right.
yeah. And one of those is just over
Let's
here.
have a look.
And it's actually really unusual, this stone, because it's almost certainly the grave of a high status woman. It's probably a senior member of the MacDonalds from the castle.
Right,
she
from
has a little
Castle
dog.
Chirham.
From Castle Chirham, and she has a little dog at her feet.
It's a very nice little personal touch to have a dog.
It is, it's a beautiful, beautiful stone, and really quite unusual.
At the highest point on the island, we come across a ruined chapel. It was built in the 14th century and later enlarged and turned into a romantic folly in the 19th century, perhaps to show off this extraordinary and unique centrepiece on the ancient altar.
So how old is this bell then?
Well, we think it's as much as 1100 years old.
How can you be sure that it is the original, that it is in fact as old as you think it is?
Well, the general size and shape fits in with a series of bells in Scotland and Ireland that are all from about 900 AD. But the really crucial thing with it is this very subtle detail up here, which is meant to look like a rope handle. But it's far too subtle and far too worn to be anything other than the real article.
Well, I must give in to temptation, and if I may,
Absolutely.
give it a wee ring. Puts you in direct contact with the past in a really, really kind of visceral way. It's fantastic.
Sadly, this wonderful bell was stolen shortly after my visit. It's a tragic loss for the island and its visitors, and I really hope it can be recovered soon. Heading up Lochs, I catch the little cruiser Sheilas, now the only passenger boat plying these waters. On board is a Moidart MacDonald, the Cayley King himself, Fergie MacDonald. Growing up on the banks of Lochs, Fergie heard tales of distant battles from his father, who served in a famous military regiment during the First World War, the Lovat Scouts.
So what drew him into the army? What drew him into military life?
Well, 1910, there wasn't much money doing, you see, and he joined the Lochs Scouts, the local regiment.
So what was it about your father that made him attractive to the Lovat Scouts?
Dad was a battalion sniper. They made him that sort of thing because he could shoot. All these hills that you see, that's where he learned to shoot.
So stalkers made naturally good
Naturally good.
sharpshooters.
They had the eye for it, yeah.
He would have come up this loch to get to the front.
Yes, they mobilized on the 4th of August, night war was declared, and then off on the old Clanranald. This is the boat that ran from Acharacal up to Glenfinnan. Little did they know that they were on the way to Suvla Bay, Gallipoli. Little did they know.
Miraculously, while so many men were killed, Fergie's dad survived the entire First World War, deployed as a sniper. But this journey up the loch was associated with war and rebellion long before the Lovat Scouts came this way. Bonnie Prince Charlie took this route up to Glenfinnan at the head of Lochs in August 1745. Here he raised his royal standard and declared his father king. The famous event is commemorated by a prominent monument on the shores of the Loch. But according to local tradition, this is not where it really happened. The actual spot is a few hundred metres away and is marked by an inscribed stone. Ian McFarlane lives locally and helps me to interpret the strange markings.
So what have we got here?
This is just marking that the standard was raised here for Charles Edward Stuart, 1745.
It's like a map of what happened.
Yeah. So here you've got footprints, and people say that that's where the prince himself stood.
There's even a crown there, look, isn't there?
That's right.
It's a crown. What's that arrow over there then?
Well, you'll see the arrow here. It's got the Roman numerals for four. And if you step out 4 feet from that arrow.
Here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That is very boggy
right
in
into
there.
the bog.
So
right in there, in the bog there's a socket, and that's where they would have raised the standard, right there. So it's quite exact. You know, the carving and the instruction of it is quite exact. So they must have taken that from local knowledge, where everyone was standing.
Well, it's a great spot for a rebellion.
Thankfully, Glenfinnan is a very harmonious place today, but you can still see a Jacobite. It's the name of the famous Harry Potter steam train, which crosses the picturesque viaduct 4 times a day. Following the route of the railway, I make my way west along the side of Loch Eelt and then down to the coast and the shores of Loch Eilert. This arm of the sea stretches 8 kilometres west, past numerous rocky skerries before reaching the open sea. Just up from the shore is Invereilert House. During the Second World War, it was taken over by the Royal Navy and became a ship, known in military circles as HMS Loch Eilert. This landlocked vessel was also known as the School for Ungentlemanly Warfare.
Invereilert House was requisitioned in 1940 and the whole estate taken over by Lord Lovat of Lovat Scouts fame and by David Stirling, the founder of the SAS. Now they chose this place partly because it was off the beaten track, making Invereilert perfect for the kind of secret warfare they were planning for.
Here they created a special training centre, the midwife to the first ever commando unit of elite fighting troops. To find out more about what went on here, I'm meeting Paul MacDonald.
Paul, how many commanders were trained at Invereilert?
Well, Invereilert, between 1940 and 42, there was over 3,000 trained there.
And how did the training start?
It started before they even reached Loch Eilert. The train taking them there would screech to a halt at Loch Eelt, which was close by the house, and they would be under live fire from that moment on.
Really?
Tracers zipping over the train, mortars being lobbed into the loch, and they were told to get off the train in no uncertain terms and then run with all their kit all the way to the house while being under fire at points on the way.
So this was a very dangerous training regime.
It was very dangerous and casualties were expected. There was a 5% expected casualty rate.
Was there really?
Yep.
The Academy's instructors, William Fairbairn and Eric Sykes, had spent over 30 years as police officers in Shanghai, a place they described as one of the toughest waterfront areas in the world. Drawing on this experience, they developed a deadly weapon for silent killing: the legendary commando knife.
There was no such thing as a fighting knife issued to the British Army at the start of the Second World War.
Really?
So a new piece of equipment had to be developed.
So where did they start? How did this knife evolve?
The origins started in Shanghai with Fairbairn Sykes' experience out in the Far East, and of course operating as police officers they weren't doing silent killing techniques, but you had to have a handy tool on you such as this, the Shanghai knife, to be able to cut your way out a clinch.
Cutting your way out of a clinch.
Yes.
So what would that involve?
Well, often carried in an upside down scabbard like this, worn on a shoulder harness. So the idea being, if you've got one or two men already on you in a street fight situation and your arms are pinned, accessing a knife on your belt's a bit more difficult, whereas you can take your hand up to your chest and this helps you cut your way out.
Which is the iconic knife, the one that everyone would recognise as being the commander knife?
This is one that's still made and still carried today by Special Forces.
And it's such an iconic image, isn't it, of the commando knife, such an iconic weapon, yet it was designed here.
Yes, exactly, and the commando knife still represents that nature of close combat, going forward with full commitment.
And Fairbairn and Sykes also produced a handbook about how to kill in the field.
Yes, exactly. It details exactly how to carry out, do some of the techniques that were taught.
How to defend yourself using a stool.
Yes.
So this is deadly stuff.
Yes. You were taught how to use the whole body, your hands, your elbows, your knees, your head, anything that came into play, but to great effect.
And I think you're going to teach me one or two moves. Is that right?
Sure, we can do that.
Maybe not aggressive ones, maybe kind of defensive ones, possibly.
Hopefully we can do something without breaking you too much.
Without breaking me. Right, that's a worrying thought.
So the idea being, if you've got a dagger in that grip,
I'm going to come at you.
You're going to attack me and you would go over the top of the chest.
Brandishing a fearsome blade, Paul shows me how the notorious knife was used in hand-to-hand combat.
Stop here.
Yeah.
Because if you carried your hands all the way to your knees,
You'd break my arm.
arm right here.
No, thank you. No, thank you. So let's see if I can
Okay,
defend
happy with
myself. Okay.
I'll attack to
Right.
you.
Half speed now.
Fairbairn's techniques took elements from Japanese judo and Chinese boxing, but were principally developed from his own experience with hardened criminals.
Go a little bit further.
Already feeling that in the shoulder.
Right.
Nicely done.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Paul.
You're
Top
welcome.
tips for next time I meet a knife in the streets.
Not a problem. You're good to go.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Feeling ready now to take on anything, I head southwest along the coast, making for my next destination, Rochven House, which nestles under the steep and rugged heights of Rochven.
Rochven House was the family home of one of the most accomplished artists and illustrators of the whole Victorian age, the now largely forgotten Jemima Blackburn.
Jemima was born in Edinburgh and moved here with her husband Hugh in the 1850s. Her beautifully detailed illustrations offer a captivating insight into Highland life. I've come to meet artist Rob Fairley to find out more about this talented painter.
Now, Rob, you've made a bit of a study of Jemima Blackburn. Now, what kind of an artist was she?
In many ways, she was a diarist, almost more than an artist, in as much as she drew every day what was going on, and sometimes several times a day.
Was she trying to preserve memories? I mean, what was the impulse there, do you think?
I think it's very much like a mobile phone now. You just record it. In many cases, they are genuinely selfies.
I love this one.
I think it's Hugh chasing the horses off his croquet lawn at 5 o'clock in the morning. His dressing gown, dancing around his knees, and I think it's lovely. And you can tell, can't you? This horse in particular is going to go prancing off, leaving big, deep footprints, and then as soon as he goes back to bed, it's going to be back again.
Jemima's intricate pictures earned her the admiration of some of the brightest minds of the age, including John Ruskin and Beatrix Potter. And I have to say, her illustrations of the wildlife around Rochven are exquisite.
Without any question, the things that she should be really famous for are ornithological drawings. Just that she was a woman and her work wasn't published very much. It was very rarely published in colour and done from life. Whereas very many of the Victorian ornithological artists were working from stuffed specimens.
That is full of life.
Yeah, she was out there doing it.
When you're surrounded by such stunning scenery, it's easy to understand why Jemima was inspired to paint. Local author Angus MacDonald has also drawn inspiration from the remote and wild lands around Rochven. His novels have brought back to life the isolated Ardnish Peninsula on the west side of Loch Islet. We're visiting the village of Peenmenich, which has been completely deserted since 1942.
Angus, can you paint a picture for me of what life might have been like 150 years ago here?
Well, Peenmenich would have had 9 houses, about 60 people living here. The men would have gone away to work. They would be driving cattle down to Falkirk over the hills. Probably half of them were in the army.
As many as that?
As many as that. It was the mainstay of the Highland economy.
Do you think it's ironic that those very military skills that made them attractive to the army, it was eventually the military that helped to do in for them, because so many of them lost their lives during the First World War and the Second World War?
I think this is a perfect example of what happened all the way up and down the West Coast. They went off to fight. 20% or up to 50% in some communities of the men died. And then within a matter of very few years, when they came back, the community decided they just couldn't manage and they moved away.
And I'm guessing that really the tragedy of the First World War was pretty much the last nail in the coffin for a place like this.
Yes, so you had the potato famine, you had the clearances, you had smallpox, you had the call of prosperity from Glasgow, one of the richest cities in the world, the emigration opportunities in Australia, New Zealand and Canada. You know, basically people said, you know, do we need to suffer as much as we are?
It seems strange and tragic that this tiny, deserted and almost forgotten piece of Scotland once sent men to fight in wars in far-flung places across the globe. But then again, this country has bred warriors for generations, from the days of warring clans to the Jacobites who followed the Prince, right up to recent history with regiments like the Lovat Scouts.
I've been following a route less travelled ever since I left Glenouig, and now, 4 lochs later, I find myself on a deserted beach below a deserted village, making this an entirely appropriate place for me to conclude my grand tour through Moydart.
On my next grand tour, I'm visiting my childhood stomping ground as I explore the Lochs of the Clyde.
For one chef, the wobble's got to be right. Back for a new series next, Great British Menu, hosted by Susan Coleman. Well, starting now over on BBC One, and also a new series, a much-loved wooden crib requires rebirth in the repair shop.